Hi guys, it's Kelly Taylor here, and I am thrilled to be doing my first video for Hero Arts as part of the design team. Today I am working with the Artichoke Arrangement bundle. So this one includes the die. You can still do this card fairly similarly if you just have the stamp set, but I think popping up the image really makes it more interesting. Here I have a pan of the liquid watercolors. I just wanted to show you very briefly. These have been sitting dried out for quite some time, and it's super easy to reconstitute them. I'm just putting in a couple of drops of water into each palette, letting it sit for a couple of seconds, and then going in with a wet paintbrush and then just mixing them up. I have not noticed that I've lost any color or that they, have watered out to a super different color. So just know that if you have them in a palette, even if they dry out, they're still good. You can still use them. Another thing that I love about them is they clean up super easy. So here I'm just going in with a wet baby wipe. This was another brown that I had, and I wanted to use the mulled wine. So I'm sorry, the teal. So I went in and added the teal into that little pot. And then I also am doing a little bit of color mixing, which is super easy with the liquid watercolors, just to get more of a yellow green. So once I had my palette all set, I went back to my image. I am using the Hero Arts watercolor paper because I'm going to be doing kind of a washy underlay that I'm going to color on top of. I'm stamping in the Hero Arts Intense Black ink. This is waterproof ink that also works with alcohol markers, and so it's kind of perfect for the combining of these mediums. I did stamp on it twice because watercolor paper is textured, so sometimes it's hard to get a perfect image the first time. But now that that is done and it is dry, I'm going to start working on the background. You can do this one of two ways. You can take a larger paintbrush and add water to the background, or you can take a squirt bottle. I chose to do the squirt bottle because I like the edges it creates. And you'll see as it starts to kind of bloom out, it makes these really interesting edges when you use the water bottle. For the laying down of my background, I knew that I wanted there to be a lot of colors because I'm going to put a lot of colors in my bouquet. I'm not paying too much attention to where the color goes. I knew the image would be, the majority of it would be green, but there's some little florals at the bottom of the arrangement, and that's where I put the purples. I also put some teal there. That teal, I love that teal. If I could put teal on all the things, it's so good. I love it. So I did add in some purples, some teals, some greens, and some yellows. And I'm just kind of letting it bloom out. You can see on the left-hand side of my paper, my background is spreading a little bit more than it is on my right-hand side of my paper. And that's okay, we're gonna fix it. If you get any colors that are puddling where you don't want them to, you can just go in with a paper towel and just use the corner to kind of blot it up. Or if you feel like you have too much water and it's diluting your colors too much, that same trick will work for both of them. Once I'm done, I'm really just kind of messing around here. I'm not adding too much more color. I'm really now trying to move the edges around. And I'm going to do that by adding clean water to the very edge of it and then letting it spread on its own. This is going to give me a lot of really organic edges and a lot of natural values. So it's just going to have a lot of color differentiation, which is what I want. Remember, when you're working with watercolor, it dries back substantially lighter than it is while it's wet. So if you're, putting down color and it's already light, when it dries, you're going to have a hard time seeing it, which may be the look that you're going for. But if you want the background to be noticeable, then you're going to have to put a little more color into it. You can always layer these. So if you do a really light wash and you're like, oh, that is too light, then just rewrite it and go back in. Those colors will still work together. So now I'm done with my palette. I'm just messing around with my edges a little bit so that it looks balanced on the page is what I'm trying to achieve. So I'm trying to kind of spread out that right-hand side a little bit more to match the width on the left-hand side. And then once I'm happy with it, I'm going to go ahead and heat dry it. I didn't have a ton of water that was bubbled up, and anywhere that I saw it kind of pooling, I just went in with that same paper towel and blotted it up. But you want to make sure to use a clean area so you're not inputting any color, you're just picking it up. You can still dry your background if you have puddles on it, but just understand that that's going to give a different look. It's not going to be as smooth. So now that this is all dry, I am going to go in and color on top of this. I have never had this give me a hard time as far as combining mediums with my alcohol markers. You know what's best for your supplies, but I have never had any issue coloring over any other types of mediums, whether that be watercolor or reactive ink or regular ink that I've done ink blending with. I haven't had a hard time with it. So now I knew going into it that the majority of my card or my bouquet was going to be green hues. And so I picked some yellow greens to start for the outside of my artichoke, but I didn't want the bouquet to be one note. So I am going to be doing a little bit of what I call like color glazing. Because alcohol markers are transparent, when you lay one color over top of another, they do work and blend together, even if they're not from the same color family. The big thing to pay attention to when you're color glazing like that is the last number in your Copic marker. So if you're using a B04 to glaze with and you want it to be more purple, then you want to use a V04. That 4 is the important part. So here I like to color lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest. That's what I feel like gives me the best blend. But if you have a system that works for you, by all means, do that. This is what works for me to be happy with the amount of dimension that I have. Like I said, everybody has different goals, you know what I'm saying, for their card. And I knew that I wanted to kind of push my watercolor into the background while still utilizing that underlay of watercolor to change the tone or the pigment of the colors I put on top of it. So here I used a B45. 5 is super close to 4, so I'm going to go in with a VO4 and just add some violet tones into my artichoke. I was really happy with the way that came out. And then I'm going to go in and remember we talked about how there was some florals down at the bottom. This little trick is called stippling, and it's really common in even like fine art courses, but it is a great way to use color for detailed images where maybe you don't feel like you can get in there as well because maybe it's a little bit smaller or there's a lot of detail drawn in. So doing stippling, which is just a series of small dots, will allow you to get a lot of color variation without the headache of having to tediously try to color each area and still have color variation. So now that those florals are done, we're going to use stippling a couple more times in this card. I will not lie to you. It's a really good technique for getting multiple colors. For the larger, what are these? I guess they're leaves, right? Yeah, for the larger leaves that are kind of in the background, I chose to do them in a more of a teal color because I wanted that color variation. I didn't want it to be all just this straight green color. And I do this on a lot of my cards. I like a lot of color variation. If you don't, that's okay. You can still use the same green, or maybe you don't own as many color families or as many markers. You can still make this work for you. I would just, if you're using a lot of the same color, I would really be paying attention to your shading and the dimension that you're creating. So this arrangement has a bunch of stems at the bottom, and there's really no good way to tell which stems go with which item. But to be honest, you don't really need to know. I just picked a couple and colored them teal, a couple and colored them green, and a couple and colored them brown for like the little cattails in the background, and called it good. Here we're back to the stippling for another set of flowers down at the bottom. I chose to do these blue And I like a brighter blue, so I usually use the B0 family, and that's what I'm using here. But you could also do like the B20 family. They're also pretty bright. They're just more on the blue side, less on the green side. For a couple of the little, I don't even know what you call them. They're like little, like when dandelions go to seed, like little wishes. That's what we called them when I was little anyway. But for those, I wanted them to be white. And anytime you're coloring an object white, you're only adding the shadows. So I'm using the colors in the background that I've laid down with the watercolor, and I'm just adding some shadows with some gray. Again, I'm using that stippling technique to add my shadows because it's going to play into the way that I do my highlights, which is with a white gel pen, and that will be later on. For the little cattails, I opted to do them brown. You could do whatever color combination you like. I chose a warmer brown because of the yellow in my background. I knew that the warm tones would play really well with the warm tones in the yellow. And for this one, it's very similar to stippling, but it's more like a dot and a little flick, just to give it some texture. And again, this is going to help set me up for some highlights and some lowlights, highlights or shadows that will work really well with my white gel pen highlights. That's by far and away like my most used thing and my biggest helper when creating dimensioning cards is my white gel pen. So I chose to do the same browns for this one over here. And I'm not entirely sure what this is. It looked very kind of leafy and feathery, and so like that's what I was picturing in my head and why I chose to color it brown. But that may actually be incorrect. So if you have a better idea for how to color it, by all means, you do you. So for the yellows, I like a more golden yellow, and I chose to do these flowers yellow because it's the complementary color to violet, and they're right next to each other. So that's how I picked that color combination. For mine, like I said, I like to do a warmer, more golden yellow, and so that's why my shading colors are more golden browns. And I did the same thing, like lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest. In order to make my images kind of pop forward a little bit, I went in with my darkest teal color because that matched the watercolor background the best, and just filled in underneath some of the other items to bring the lightness forward by putting the darkness in. Here is where Here, I'm just going to go in with the browns. Like I told you before, I just selected a variety of them so that they matched. I enjoy outlining all of my images with a Copic Safe pen. Not everybody does, and it certainly is not necessary for the image to be beautiful, but I like a bold black outline, and so that is why I choose to do that. I am now going to go in with that white gel pen I've been talking about this whole time. I added some dots to the flowers to add some highlights there. I'm adding some dots to those little wishes, those little puffy balls, to help make them look puffy. In order for that to work, you do need to put some of the dots over the black line. And the same thing with the cattails. I'm going to do the same, like where I put a little dot in and then kind of flick it a little bit. And you're going to want to go over that black stamped line in order for it to look like it's actually fuzzy. This now is all done and complete. I am going to use some washi tape to hold down my die, and then I'm going to run it through. You want to save both pieces for this card. So I love the bouquet on its own. I think it's gorgeous. I think that it would look super pretty on a background by itself. And in fact, I will show you that later on. But I really wanted to utilize that kind of soft watercolor wash. So I'm going to trim this down just a smidge. And I trim it on every side so that it is equal. That way my image is still centered. And then I'm going to heat set my sentiment on some Eggplant cardstock, which I think is just a beautiful color for fall. I treated it with my anti-static tool, and then I'm going to use our embossing ink to stamp it down. You could clearly do this, with whatever colors that you chose to use in your arrangement. I used some violets in there, and so that's why I chose this color Cardstock. I'm using the white detail embossing powder to do my sentiment. I love a bright white sentiment on a darker colored cardstock. I just think it looks like magic. The embossing process never gets old for me. So once I was happy that I got all of my strays, I am going to heat set that. And then I will trim it down into a smaller label for my card. Here's kind of all my pieces parts. This is what the image would look like without the background, and I think this is also beautiful, but I wanted to use the background. So I am going to adhere my background down flat using our precision glue. I'm just going to glue it right down to the eggplant card front. And then I'm going to do something. I don't know if it's entirely unpopular. It's just something that is a little bit time consuming, but I think that the look of it is worth it. And that is, I'm going to pop my image up on foam tape. Sometimes when you have images that have kind of all of these pieces, parts that stick out, it can be a little bit time consuming to do this. But for this particular card, I really loved how when you popped it up, you could still see kind of the eggplant cardstock underneath it, and it gave it just more dimension and more just overall interesting look. So to me, it was worth it to spend the time. Now that I have the whole thing covered, I'm going to remove my backing paper, and then I'm going to fit this back in there just like a puzzle piece, just right back into the die. And like I said, from the front, you can't see it, but from the side, you can still see like that little peak of eggplant. And I think that that's a really fun look. For the sentiment, I wanted it to be flush with the image. So in order to make that happen, I need to put foam tape on just one side of it. So here I'm kind of measuring out how much foam tape I need. I did trim my piece down just a smidge so it would fit better. And then I will put that on the far right-hand side of the sentiment. I will put glue on the left-hand side because it will be flush on top of the arrangement. And then I will adhere that down. And that's just going to make sure that everything sits and looks the way that it is supposed to and nothing's uneven. The last thing that I did is I like a lot of shimmer, I like a lot of glitter, and I love our iridescent spray, but sometimes I want it to be a little bit more controlled. So when that happens, I just put a little bit on my acrylic block and then pick it up with a paintbrush so I can paint it exactly where I want it to go. So I put it on the centers of my artichokes, I put it on some of the florals, and then that's it. That is the whole card. So I hope that you have learned a couple of things, that you're inspired to try maybe something similar. I appreciate you guys spending your time with me today, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.